Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. After months of volatile negotiations, Kyiv and Washington finally have a deal. The historic economic partnership opens up a new chapter in the U.S.-Ukraine relations and a promise of greater U.S. involvement with the war-torn country. More on that in just a moment, but before we dive in, the latest headlines. A look at the attitudes of Polish presidential candidates towards the EU on the 21st anniversary of Poland joining the bloc. Major protests in Budapest as civil society opposes Pride March ban. And a week before the start of the conclave, we introduced the cardinals considered frontrunners in the election. Thanks to this agreement, we will be able to attract significant resources for reconstruction, start economic growth, and receive the latest technologies from partners and a strategic investor in the United States, said Ukraine's Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal about the United States-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund. The agreement is meant to accelerate Ukraine's economic recovery and unlock lucrative assets. Gabriela Fesnak breaks down the deal in her report.
When I came here, I said, how much money have we given to Ukraine?
Following months of tense negotiations, Ukrainian Minister of Economic Development and Trade Yulia Sviridenko and U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent signed the much-awaited minerals deal, granting the U.S. access to some of the war-torn country's natural resources.
Thanks to President Trump's tireless efforts to secure a lasting peace, I am glad to announce the signing of today's historic economic partnership agreement between the United States and Ukraine, establishing the United States-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky attributes the successful agreement on the terms of the deal to his last week's meeting with President Donald Trump at the Vatican.
It is now truly a fair agreement that creates substantial investment opportunities in Ukraine. This agreement does not create debt. It establishes a recovery fund that will invest in Ukraine and generate profits here. It is a joint effort with America, built on equal terms, allowing both Ukraine and the United States, which supports us in our defense efforts, to benefit from this partnership.
The fund created in the deal will draw revenue from Ukraine's natural resources. The version of the document signed on Wednesday varies significantly from the original deal proposed by the US in February, which fell through after a turbulent White House meeting between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky.
The first drafts were quite unprofitable for Ukraine, but then there was a diplomatic work on the text from both sides, and now the deal which was signed is a good deal for Ukraine.
Originally, the Reconstruction Investment Fund was intended as a way for Ukraine to pay off its debt to the US for the military support it has received since the start of the war. The new agreement does not mention Ukraine's debt and splits the ownership of the fund 50-50, with no majority stakeholder.
The United States will contribute to the fund. In addition to direct financial contributions, it may also provide new assistance, for example, air defense systems for Ukraine. Ukraine will contribute 50% of state budget revenues from new rent on new licenses for new areas.
Despite Ukraine pushing for security guarantees to prevent Russia from invading again, the deal includes no such provisions.
The minerals agreement is the first step to a security guarantee. That's because it's going to take years to get those deposits from the rare earth minerals and thus the profits. So any fund, which is what we have today, with 50-50 control, it's going to be years before you see that money flowing through.
The deal also appears to specifically keep the door open for Ukraine to eventually join the European Union. Ukraine's parliament still has to ratify the agreement and is expected to do so within the next 2 weeks.
Let's now move to Ukraine, where a collective sigh of relief sounded all across the country as the long-anticipated U.S.-Ukraine agreement was finally signed. Our correspondent, Don Arleth, is in Ukraine and brings us the latest on the reactions to the deal announcement.
While U.S. and Ukrainian officials signed that minerals deal overnight in the United States, of course, a Russian drone attack rained down on the city. 22 Shmyhal drones were fired on civilian objects. A school was damaged, railway infrastructure. 2 people were killed, 15 people were wounded, and 6 remain in critical condition. Now, we were awoken by this overnight and heard these attacks and explosions throughout the city. But when we awoke today, we got the news that that mineral deal was actually signed between the United States and Ukraine. So we wanted to get the mood on the street and ask Ukrainians how they felt about this latest development and whether it would better relations with the United States.
I believe the United States did this primarily for their own interest, not for Ukraine. All these agreements will bring them profit, not Ukraine, unfortunately.
I think, or rather I hope, that this will be good for us, for America, for the whole world, if I can put it that way. For Europe too, I really hope something good will come of it.
Overall, I view the agreement between the US and Ukraine positively, and the fact that it is now somehow moving toward peace negotiations is actually not a bad thing.
I also spoke briefly today with a Ukrainian MP from the city of Odessa, Alexei Goncharenko, and he told me it was a good thing that this deal was signed. Of course, this will allow Ukraine to have better access to capital and new technologies to exploit these resources. It'll create a partnership with the United States. He said the United States is our partner. So the very positive outlook on this minerals deal being signed between the United States and Ukraine, and with Russia's reluctance to enter into a ceasefire, unconditional ceasefire especially, of course, many are hoping that a change of tactics from the United States might just be around the corner. Reporting from Odessa, Don Arleth, TVP World.
Meanwhile, the European Commission expressed its satisfaction about the U.S. and Ukraine reaching an agreement on the establishment of a Reconstruction Investment Fund. The Commission also noted that the agreement doesn't include any clauses that could jeopardize Ukraine's EU accession. Joining me now live is our EU correspondent Alex Cadier. Good evening, Alex. So based on what we've seen so far, would you say the Commission's response to the deal was rather positive, or are they approaching it with caution?
Well, it's broadly supportive, broadly positive, but of course, as you would expect, keeping an eye on how this deal pans out. I heard from Thomas Renier, the EU Commission spokesperson. That is crucial, of course, because the European Commission, that building behind me, is responsible for overseeing Ukraine's path towards membership and making sure that the necessary reforms are being made. The Commission saying that today's agreement includes specific provisions, as you said, aiming to safeguard Ukraine's application to join the European Union and to avoid conflicts, crucially, with the current obligation that Ukraine has with within the EU-Ukraine Association Agreement. Crucial there, because many experts that I've spoken to in the weeks and months leading up to this deal had said there is a potential that this could damage Ukraine's hopes of joining the European Union if they give the US preferential treatment over other European allies. Now, the crucial detail in that statement from the Commission, we look forward to these, the methods of protecting the EU's the accession process. We look forward to these being implemented rigorously. So clearly the European Commission keeping an eye on this deal and making sure that it doesn't jeopardize Ukraine's path to membership. But nevertheless, that path continues. We've heard just in the last few moments from Marta Kos, the EU's enlargement commissioner, who said that she is still recommending to open the first chapter of the negotiations with Ukraine. That means that the European Commission deems that Ukraine has made enough progress on reforms to the judiciary, to fundamental rights, to public procurement. A lot of technical details to be negotiated, but enough progress to move forward with this process. It will take years, and certainly one thing to look out for, once Ukraine is part of the European Union, the EU will have a right to negotiate its trade position. That may bring it into conflict with the United States, but that is many, many years away. For now, full steam ahead for Ukraine's membership of the EU.
Thank you so much. That was Alex Cadier reporting live from Brussels. Poland joined the European Union 21 years ago. More than 2 decades since the accession, the country's place in the bloc continues to be the subject of heated debates. As Poles will be casting their votes in the presidential election in just over 2 weeks, Kazimierz Łysiak takes a look at how different candidates would approach Poland's relation with the EU.
On May 1st, Poles gather at public picnics to celebrate their country's membership in the European Union. It's been more than 20 years since Poland joined the bloc, and for many Poles, it's still a great source of pride.
It's for our security and development. It makes other countries in Europe respect us more.
It's better to be united than divided. Since we are in Europe, then we should be together with our friends in Europe.
Nowadays, Poland's EU membership is rarely disputed by politicians. But while some are more open to work with the European Union,
Europe has to be the strongest. Europe has to be the most competitive, and people in Europe have to feel the safest in the world.
Others have a different attitude. Take, for example, the far-right populist presidential candidate Sławomir Mencen.
These madmen in the European Union are coming up with different nonsense to harm our farmers.
Or the runner-up in the election, conservative historian backed by the Law and Justice Party, Karol Nawrocki.
Here, it is Poland. We don't want the European Union to tell us how to dress, what we should eat, and what our children should be learning at school. No to ideology.
Nawrocki's main opponent is Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski. Currently the frontrunner in the election, he was formerly a member of the European Parliament. As the leading candidate of the ruling coalition, he represents a much more cooperative attitude towards the European Union.
Times are tough, but European integration is incredibly important for us. We need closer cooperation with our neighbors.
As one of the 27 member states, Poland has a number of responsibilities, like adherence to EU regulations. But it also receives massive financial and political support. Jan Troszczyński, one of the chief negotiators responsible for Poland joining the bloc, has no doubts about these benefits.
Bigger welfare of all citizens, better standing in Europe and in the world, gain in worldwide respect.
Under the previous Conservative Law and Justice Party government, billions of euros from EU funds had been frozen by the European Commission over undemocratic changes to the judiciary. The current centre-liberal ruling camp has already unlocked the bulk of these funds through closer cooperation with the EU. The outcome of the upcoming presidential election could be the deciding factor in unlocking the rest of that money. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
On Wednesday, the Hungarian capital of Budapest saw a major protest organized in opposition to Viktor Orbán government's ban of LGBTQ+ marches. Our correspondent Aisha Badje is on site and joins me now to tell us about today's events. Good evening, Aisha. So, how would you describe the demonstration? Did things escalate? Do you think that this is yet another sign of tides shifting in Hungary?
Good evening. Well, the organizers of the demonstrations really made a point of wanting to hold these demonstrations as peaceful as possible, and this is how they took place. So there was no escalation. They started in front of the Hungarian government, the Hungarian parliament, where there were some anti-government speeches, and also this defiance against the ban of Pride. The law that banned Pride was announced in the middle of March, but it did not only ban Pride, it also allowed police officers to use Chinese facial AI recognition tools for anyone who would defy actually this ban. The peaceful protests started in front of the parliament, and then it turned into a peaceful march that led to the bridge that we are standing here today. But when we came here earlier today, there was hundreds of policemen standing here trying to prevent the demonstrators from blocking the bridge like they did a couple of weeks before. They blocked one of the main bridges here in Budapest. And earlier today we spoke to the main organizer of the demonstrations. This is an independent MP called Ákos Hatházi, and here is what he had to tell us.
The law banned the Pride rally, but in fact, it's about outlawing more than that. In essence, it's about providing the legal basis for banning anti-regime, anti-government demonstrations in the future. Fundamentally, it's a technical law allowing for the use of Chinese-style facial recognition technologies against participants in banned demonstrations. We want to see such a law repealed now.
And not only that, so we spoke to some of the demonstrators here, what they thought about the ban of Pride, what they thought about the use of Chinese facial recognition tools. And here's what they had to say about this new legislation.
I would like to move the political scene of Hungary to a more democratic one, with obviously less corruption. And also, I hope that in the future, the education system, the healthcare system will improve in Hungary if the politics and the politicians will be less corrupt, and there could be a democratic change.
I think it's not good that the Hungarian state forbid the Pride. And I'm thinking it's every person's right to living their life. And I think a government is not allowed to interrupt these like human rights, yeah.
So, like I said, the protests were very peaceful, and even though there is a possibility that these demonstrators can be fined, they were still here to show their support for the LGBT community, but also to stand up for their rights to assemble, but also to express themselves. We will see what the impact of the demonstrations will be. The organizers say that they will continue in the upcoming weeks, so we'll just have to wait and see what the situation will look like. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much, Aisha. That was Aisha Bajit reporting live from Budapest. It's almost time for 135 cardinals to gather in the iconic Sistine Chapel to choose the new pontiff. But this age-old tradition will not come without certain challenges, as the Church itself is facing an array of issues. How is the conclave going to look like, and who could become the next Bishop of Rome? Sasha Farbach has this next report.
Following Pope Francis' death and funeral, a period known as sede vacante begins, leaving the seat of St. Peter and the papal throne empty for the time being. However, on May 7th, 135 cardinals from around the world will come together in the iconic Sistine Chapel, the heart of the Vatican, to choose a new pontiff. As the so-called princes of the Church gather, experts say the cardinals face a challenging task.
Cardinals are of all the world, of different cultures. They have to reconcile their different perspectives and choose someone who will answer the needs of the Church in the best way possible.
With there being no official candidates, the cardinals will vote daily until one of them receives a two-thirds majority of votes required to elect Francis' successor. Potential choices include Pietro Parolin, a continuity candidate close to the late Pope, Cardinal Ambongo, a leading African voice who could be the first African Pope, and Cardinal Tagle, the Asian Francis, known for his focus on social issues. Some theological experts suggest the new Pope could bring a fresh perspective to the ancient institution.
I expect someone new. Someone who will not follow the path of Benedict XVI nor Francis. If there is a person to be somehow followed, my expectation would be John Paul II. However, he was quite unique.
As the conclave begins, the cardinals will have to address an array of issues which confront the Church and the new pontiff.
The problem of child abuse, or the problem of financial problems of the Church. Some others will say the problem of evangelization, to give hope for people all over the world. There is a problem of secularization.
As the faithful gather in St. Peter's Square, expectations are high for a swift election. Throughout history, conclaves have lasted anywhere from 25 hours to 3 years, with the longest modern election taking 5 days in 1903. This papal election, however, may take longer than recent ones.
I'm not expecting any fast election. I think there will be a lot of prayer and discernment during conclave.
After mourning the loss of their Pope, Catholics worldwide now await as the Cardinals enter the Sistine Chapel, eager to see who will emerge as the new Pope to lead the 1.4 billion faithful. Sasha Farbach, TVP World.
And now time to delve in even deeper on the subject of the much-awaited mineral deal which was signed on Wednesday. What did Ukraine manage to leverage? How is the U.S. going to, from now on, protect their interests in Ukraine and perhaps, by proxy, Ukraine itself? Joining me now to talk about this important development is Editor-in-Chief of Kyiv Post, Bogdan Mihailo. Good evening. Thank you for joining. We meet again on this important day. And I suppose the key question based on your assessment, this United States-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund, is it good for Ukraine?
It is much better than what had been proposed by the Trump administration only weeks ago. Look, what the Trump administration had proposed was unacceptable for Ukraine, let's be frank. It was extortionist in its character. It amounted to bullying, if you want. You do what we're told, you give us what we want. We take control effectively of your economic future, and you repay us for the military aid that you received during the Biden administration. I mean, amazing. Which other country has even thought of saying something? Imagine Poland saying to Ukraine, look, for the help we've given you in recent years, we want a share of your economy and we want you to do as we tell you. So it was totally unacceptable, smacked of 19th century colonialism. And what is very impressive is that Zelensky managed, despite the pressure, to stand his ground, and the new framework agreements. Remember, this is not the final document. This is the framework within which other agreements, which will concretize, give the details of how this agreement will be applied in practice, will be worked out. So, yes, it's good for Ukraine, given the circumstances.
Yes?
Yeah.
Please continue.
Well, I think what is particularly important, look, is what I've just mentioned, that this new version is based on parity. It's not based on domination by America. It's not based on bullying, as I've said. And it recognizes Ukraine's ownership of its natural resources, and it doesn't have any debt obligation element. You know, you repay us for what we've given you. What is lacking in it, of course, still is security guarantees of some sort. That is left aside, and this is the big headache, the big issue confronting Ukraine, but its neighbors and Europe generally. What will the US do to back up its foothold now in the Ukrainian economy?
And what do you think? What is your opinion? What is the U.S. actually going to do to protect its own business? Because the new administration seems to be pointing in a direction of taking care of their own business first. So if the business is going to be done with Ukraine, on Ukrainian territory, perhaps there is a leeway into some sort of a security or partial security guarantee.
The Trump administration has been very careful to avoid tackling the issue of security. It's standing aside, and Ukrainians don't know what comes next. Okay, right, the Americans will be involved in a joint fund being set up with the Ukrainians based on mineral resources as yet untapped, new ones that have to be developed, and that implicitly suggests that the Americans will be interested in protecting their economic investment in some form. But we don't know what that means in practice. Does it mean that Trump will still insist in placating Putin by writing off a large part of eastern Ukraine, not only the Donbass and Crimea, but right up to Zaporizhia and the power station there, etc.? That is left unclear. So right now, the situation is much better than it was at the time of that shameful meeting in the Oval Office when there was an attempt to bully Zelensky into conformity. The terms are much more acceptable, but so much more still needs to be clarified, explained, guaranteed.
I'm happy that you mentioned the Zaporizhzhia power plant, the nuclear power plant, which is currently occupied by Russia. We've heard from the U.S. administration previously considering taking control over the power plant as part of a peace deal. Do you think that this is possible, and could this lead to a potential escalation between the U.S. and Russia if that was to take place?
Well, look, the escalation is there. Look, let's not kid ourselves. Moscow will not be happy that this framework agreement has been signed and that a common language, at least on this level, has been found finally between Kyiv and Washington. They obviously are not happy by this, but they have made it very clear in Moscow that they don't want to relinquish control of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station. Let me emphasize, this is the largest nuclear power station in Europe, and it is right in the heart of Ukraine. It's not in the Donbass, it's on the Dnieper River. If you want, this is a time bomb in the very heart of Ukraine. The Russians want to keep control of that so that they have a blackmail possibility through seeing this power station as an effective time bomb. On the other hand,
not the only time bomb, considering.
On the other hand, it could serve as providing the energy for the occupied territories that they occupy, because it's a long way from Moscow. They need that too. So, situation is very unclear. But remember that until very recently, until a few days ago, the Americans themselves were proposing a formula which didn't sound particularly good to Ukrainians, but they were saying, okay, let the Americans take control of safeguarding the Zaporizhzhia power station. And no, the Russians immediately came back, said, no, we have it and we will keep control of it.
So do you think it's possible that in the way that the deal was structured between Ukraine and the US, it is going to upset Russia to such an extent that the Kremlin is going to decide to pull away from the negotiating table?
They won't pull away. It's not in their interest to be seen to be pulling away, but they will do everything possible to prolong this state of affairs, the fighting. I mean, look at this morning. Odessa was severely hit, deaths.
2 killed, 50 wounded, 6 in critical.
Yes, and this follows, weeks of this intensified bombing. It's not just terror tactics. The Russians also realize that if some kind of peace deal is arrived at, a temporary one, freezing the conflict, they want to grab as much territory in the meantime as they possibly can to justify their claims to essentially a third or more of eastern Ukraine.
And the final question, very shortly. The agreement was signed. We know that Ukraine's parliament still has to ratify the agreement, which will probably happen within the next 2 weeks. But when are we actually to see this agreement bear fruit? When are we going to see some extraction taking place and money actually flowing into the fund?
Look, experts tell us that it's going to take not just months, years, and the first dividends, the first concrete results in terms of finances that come out of this is going to be possibly in about a decade, 10 years. So it's a long-term investment. What I would stress here is the symbolism is very important. It's not the practicalities and the imminent results of this agreement, but the fact that it's been signed and it commits America to maintain a foothold in Ukraine, an economic one, but now on a basis of parity and with respect to Ukraine, not in the way that they were treating Canada, Greenland, Panama until recently. And what we note, look, the very important aspect here is that as soon as this agreement was signed, we got news that the Trump administration has renewed the sale of arms to Ukraine. This has been frozen since Trump took over. This is an important element which also suggests that there's some rethinking in the White House, recognition that they're not going to get it all their way.
Definitely an important development. Thank you so much for joining. Bogdan Nahailo, editor-in-chief of Kyiv Post. Pleasure as always to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thank you, likewise.
And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment with more news and features, and I'll see you there.